right, let's get started, all right? Minor prophets, what do you know about them? Well, let's look at the Bible. Open up the table of contents. Somebody said they liked it when I talk about the Pew Bible, table of contents. We did this in our last study when we just looked at what it's all about. And look at the table of contents. That's just open up 2 or 3 pages in there. Every Bible will have them. And you've got a listing of the 66 books of the Bible. Now then, look at the Old Testament and look at the last 17 books of the Old Testament. In the last 17 books of the Old Testament, you have the books of prophecy of the Old Testament. Most individuals who have very little knowledge of the Bible, just an acquaintance with the Bible, most folks who go to churches where they don't study the Bible, thinks that chronologically, if you start reading Genesis and read it all the way through, it's just one event after another, and the books are in here chronologically. But the books of the Bible are not listed, in the Bible chronologically. They're in there by topic matter. And so you've got the first 5 books. Sometimes we call those law. I prefer to call them the books of Moses. Because that allows for there to be both history and law in Genesis through Deuteronomy. In fact, most Bibles, if you look at the book of Genesis, will say the first book of Moses called Genesis. And so that's what those first 5 books are all about. The next 12 books, starting with Joshua and ending with Esther, are historical books. And when you get to the end of the book of Esther, that's all the chronology there is in the Bible. I mean that's, if you're thinking about starting at the first and reading it all the way through, you start with Genesis, you get to Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther, and when you get to the book of Esther, that's it. That's all the history there is. Well, that's only 17 books of the 39 books of the Old Testament. What are these other books about? The next 5 books, starting with Job and going through the Song of Solomon, are poetical books. Many of them were the songs that the people sang. They're poems. They're not written historically. You get over there and you read it about He leadeth me beside the still waters and the green pastures and the rod and the staff. You understand that. That's poems. And so you've got beginning with the book of Job and going through Song of Solomon, you got the poems, you got the poetry of the Old Testament. Now then, the writers of those books lived during those first 17 books of the Bible. We're not for sure, by the way, who wrote the book of Job. Doesn't matter. The Jews knew it was inspired from the day they got it, and so they knew, they understood it was from God. But we do know who wrote most of the Psalms, do we not? I hope we know. Who wrote most of the Psalms? David. Who wrote the Proverbs? Solomon. Is this one too hard? Who wrote Song of Solomon? Well, Solomon is a good answer. It's written on 2 different levels. There's a woman that talks all the way through the book of the Song of Solomon. It's not a very long book, but those characters, where'd you read about them? Well, you read them back over the historical books. And so, beginning with Isaiah and going through Daniel, you have what is called the major prophets. Major prophets. And then the last 12 books, starting with Hosea and going through Malachi, they're called minor prophets. And I'm not sure exactly why they're called major prophets and minor prophets. There is a sense in which many of these major prophets are bigger. So we got the big books of prophecy and the little books of prophecy. But that will not exactly work because, Zechariah's got more chapters than Daniel does. And so, but they're called the major prophets. They're the heavyweights. And you'd recognize Isaiah and Jeremiah. You recognize those names. Ezekiel and Daniel. They're major prophets. And so the last 12 books, and that's the direction we're headed, is to talk about the minor prophets. And so that's where we're headed. I'm not sure exactly how many of the minor prophets we will cover. We've got from now until the end of November to get as far as we can But knowing up front that we'll not be able to cover it all, we're just going to play it by ear to see how well we can come. We are in the process right now of laying out a study that will cover in the adult classes every book of the Bible, and just going to make sure that we study every book of the Bible. We've already just about laid it out, and it'll take 5 or 6, 7 years or something like that, maybe a little longer than that, to look at every book in the Bible. And then in addition to that, we're going to have topical studies like we often have in the study of the Bible. So we'll have topical studies and we'll have textual studies. Textual studies are important because that allows you to read the very words of God and recognize what God says about this. Surveys sometimes reflect the interest of the teacher. And so what he would choose to teach out of the book of Genesis might not be what some other individual might teach out of the book of Genesis. And so there's a real importance in textually studying the Bible. One of the problems we face in our Christian colleges in training preachers is that preachers sometimes do not get a real textual study of the Bible. A lot of it is survey studies of the Bible, and I think that's part of what's given rise to schools of preaching, to allow individuals to get in and textually study the Bible. Both of them have their place, and both of them have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. Minor prophets, where do they fit? Well, let's introduce chronologically what happened. You are aware that when they came into the promised land, when Moses is dead, who takes Moses' place? You know the books of the Bible. When Moses dies, what's after Deuteronomy? Joshua. What happens after Joshua dies? Next book, right? Joshua, then Judges. So they get into the land, they've got to have some sort of government, and the kind of government they have is judges. And the judges were deliverers, and they led them in their battles against evil, but they're called judges because that's what they did. In some respects, pardon me, they're parallel to the Supreme Court. You know, here's our Constitution, and it lays out very, very specific laws, sometimes in principle, but it lays out very, very detailed things that are to happen. But then there is the application of that law, and so as long as Moses was alive, Moses could handle that. And Moses selected 70 men to help him in governing the people and help him in deciding the disputes. But when they get to the promised land, and under Joshua they're fighting the battles to conquer the promised land, they've got to have some sort of government. And so God raised up judges for about 350 years. After that, the people said, we don't want to have judges over us. Tragic mistake in the story of the Old Testament. Tragic mistake in the story of the Old Testament. Because Samuel was upset. He's the last of the judges. And Samuel was upset because he evidently thought they had rejected him. And the Lord comes to Samuel and said, they haven't rejected you. It's me they've rejected, that I should not be ruler over them. They already had a king. They already had a kingdom. They already had a king. And the king was the God who was up in heaven. And whenever they decided we don't like having the theocracy, God rules through the principles and the laws of the last half of Exodus and the book of Leviticus that has so much of the Old Testament law and how they were to live in their daily life. And then the matter of the judges, they said, that's not what we want. We want to have a king so we can be like the kingdom. God gives them 3 kings. The first one was King Saul, King David, King Solomon. And it is at this point our knowledge of the Bible enters into a fog. You ever been driving down the highway and all of a sudden, you know, you go into a fog and you drive for the next 35, 40, 50 miles and you can't even see the scenery on the side. You're so focused just trying to keep it in the middle of the road and everything. And a lot of times that's what happens to our Bible knowledge. And that's what I want us to do, is to talk about what happened when Solomon died. And I'm going to talk about that because it's during the time after Solomon died that the prophets lived. And I'm talking about the last 17 books of the Old Testament. It's after the death of Solomon. As long as you've got Samuel, as long as you've got the judges, you've got Samuel, as long as you've got David and Solomon, you've got a religious leader sent by God, spiritually directed by God. But whenever you get evil kings governing the people, you've got to have some spirituality. And so that's why the prophets came. And so that's where we're headed. Let's talk about when Solomon died. How many tribes of Israel were there that got land? How many tribes of Israel got land? Is that a better way of saying it? How many tribes? Well, I'll ask the first question. You did better on the first question. How many tribes of Israel were there? There were 12. How many tribes of Israel got land? 12. All right, you got it right. Well, I just asked the questions in the wrong order. And so you've got the 12 tribes, and they get into the land, and before they ever get into the land, God divides that land out among the people. Now, they're not maps in the Pew Bible. Look on your neighbor's Bible and look over at the back in the maps that they have. And you'll have the maps in the back of the Bibles are usually laid out chronologically. If you'll start at the first map and just turn right through and look at the heading, you'll find a heading on that map that says the land divided among the tribes, or during the period of the judges. You may have a map during the period of the judges, during the period of the kings. And if you've got a lot of maps, you'll find one that have it colored in 12 different shades. That helps me, to try to figure out where everybody lived. Sometimes those who make maps just decide to put the big names of the tribes in the various places. Now, there was one tribe that did not receive land per se, and that's the tribe of Levi. So where did they live? You look at that map there, and Joyce, I see your map, and I see how you have it laid out. They just took the land. Can we think about counties? Will that help us? Here are states. Here's a state, and it's divided into 12 different geographical tribes. That might help us to get a visual, mental concept of what happened. They got to the land, and there were boundaries that divided one tribe from another, and it was important for that to exist. But the Levites were different. The Levites were the priestly tribe. And so when they got into the promised land, God intended for the Levites to be the spiritual leader of the people. That was His plan once they got into the promised land. And so He scattered the Levites in 48 cities all the way through the land. And so they had their cities, and they had smaller inserts into each of the counties. I don't know if that's a good way to think about it, but they were given areas that were Levitical cities, and there were 48 cities where the Levites lived. The whole intent was for the Levites to spiritually impact the people, for them to be there, because they were the ones who were going to be involved in all of the animals sacrificed and in all the feast days and everything. God's intent was for them to be spiritual out among the people. So you got the 12 tribes, and it's tremendously great. You might have in the back of your Bible, if you've got 20 maps, you may have a map that shows the division whenever Solomon was on the throne. It was one of the great kingdoms of the world. It was almost a world kingdom whenever Solomon is on the throne. But Solomon dies, and there's a problem, that you and I face, that they faced, and that is taxes. Look in 1 Kings chapter 12. Here Solomon dies. You read about his death in chapter 11. But when you get to, well, look at the last verses of chapter 11. In the Pew Bible, it's on page 315. There's the death of Solomon. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that they did in his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon? And the period Solomon reigned in Jerusalem of Israel was 40 years. Solomon rested with his father, and Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. That's what happens when you've got a kingdom. The king dies, it's the king's son. And so there is a genealogy of royalty. So Solomon has a son by the name of Rehoboam. His name is found in chapter 12, verse 1. And all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. But there's problems that arise. In verse 4, when the people got ready to make Rehoboam king, they said, "Your fathers made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the burden service of your father and his heavy yoke which you put on us, and we will serve you." Okay, problem, overtaxed. And so Rehoboam says, "What should I do about this?" Verse 6, he asked for wisdom from the older men. And the wisdom that came from the older men, it says, if you will be verse 7, if you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, they'll be your servants forever. That's one piece of advice he got. The other piece of advice came from those who were contemporaneous with him, the younger people, and they said, "Go out and here's what you should say." Verse 9, "Lighten the yoke which your fathers put on us. Thus shall you speak to the people." Verse 10, "Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Then you shall say to them, my little finger will be thicker than my father's waist." You ain't seen nothing yet. Here you think about the oppression of taxation that you have and the burden that you have in having this kingdom. The thickness of my little finger on top of you is going to be the size of my father's waist. How big does that make Rehoboam's waist? I'm not talking literal, but figuratively. Well, there's rebellion. There is rebellion, and the kingdom is divided into two kingdoms. There is a northern kingdom and there is a southern kingdom. Now, I'll tell you, here's what we're going to do. I believe you folks over here are on the north side, are you not? In this, can I let you guys be the northern kingdom? And you guys are over here on the south side, and I'm going to let you be the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom. I've got to have a name. What are we going to call? Well, we're going to call this northern kingdom Israel. Now, prior to this time, when you'd read about the Jews, they're the children of Israel, they're the kingdom of Israel. And occasionally, even in the minor prophets, they'll talk about Israel, and they're not just talking about the northern kingdom. But there is that distinction between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And that's critical for us to recognize. Because of American history, if we think about a civil war, had the war between the states ended differently, America would have had southern states and it would have had northern states. It would have been a divided nation. Likely would have become two nations. And that's what happened. Substantially, that's what happened. You guys from Israel, you're going to pick your own kings. You're not going to have anything to do with those folks over there. Now they're your blood. They're family over there. But you are going to be on your own and stand for what you want. Your name is Israel. So I'm going to ask in a few minutes, what's your name? And you're going to say, Can you say it a little bit louder? Joe needs to hear you. And Joe's not here, so you need to say it well. What's your name? All right. Southerners, what's your name? Judah. All right. Now then, so we've got two kingdoms. Well, now wait a minute. Which kingdom is the largest? Uh-oh, I may have done this wrong. Which kingdom is the largest kingdom? All right. Israel is the larger kingdom. There were 12 tribes. How many tribes are a part of Israel? The number is 10. What's your name? How many tribes? 10. You got it? Israel, 10. What's your name? Judah. How many tribes? 2. All right. You've got 2 tribes. 10 tribes, 2 tribes. Well, we got to get you a king, don't we? Who is your first king? We'll start over here because your kings follow the lineage of David all the way through. And so there's a royal family, the house of David. And so when Solomon dies, Solomon's son is what? Is who? Rehoboam. Northern kingdom, what's the name of your king? Jeroboam. Now I'm going to tell you how old I was before I learned that these guys were not twin brothers. Everybody I'd ever known who had kids who had names that sounded alike, they were twins. And so it just absolutely remarkable that Jeroboam has no connection at all with the royal family of David. Now, you've got the lineage over here, and all of those are descendants of David, but there are several different families that are involved over here. It's not one continuous lineage from the family of Jeroboam all the way down. By the way, how many tribes you guys have? 2. What's your name? Who's your king? Rehoboam. Who's your king? Jeroboam. All right. Well, let's see. What do you got to have? Got to have a city. Got to put you guys in a city. What city shall we give you? Well, that which later became the capital city of this northern kingdom is a place that you've heard of, and that is Samaria. Samaria. Now, this is going to be real hard. Tribe of Judah, the house of David. What do you reckon would be your capital city? All right, Jerusalem. It's not right at first, but it becomes the capital city. So where you're going to go see the king? Where are you going to go? Go to Jerusalem. You're going to go see your king? Where are you going to go? You're going to a city called Samaria. Now there is, in the New Testament, Samaria, which is a geographical area. And so you need to understand that city also became a name of a province in the New Testament times. What's your city? Jerusalem. What's your city? How many tribes you guys have? 2. How many tribes you have? And your king is who? Jeroboam. Your king is who? You got to speak out, folks. No learning is going to take place unless I hear you talk, okay? Who's your king? Jeroboam. Who's your king? Rehoboam. All right. They've got the easy answers over here, all right? So you've got a capital city. Now then, this is really, really important. They've got the easy answer. I'll ask you, what is the dominant tribe in the southern kingdom? Now, there are only 2 of them. One of them's Judah and the other one's Benjamin. Of those 2, which 2 you think would be the dominant tribe? Judah. Question over here. Dominant tribe in the northern kingdom. There's a lot of quietness over here, or I've gone deaf, one or the other. It's Ephraim. Now listen, you've got to get this. Because when you read about the minor prophets, sometimes the prophets will call this entire nation Ephraim. That's the dominant tribe, almost numerically, and it's the dominant tribe over here. And so the prophets will talk about Ephraim. When they're not talking obviously not talking about Ephraim, the son of Joseph. He's been dead, several hundred years. And yet all of a sudden you'll be reading in the prophets, and especially the minor prophets, and they will talk about Ephraim. Or they may call it Samaria. Or they may call it Israel. They may call it Judah. They may call it Jerusalem. Got a picture? Now here's one I hope you know from walking through from the soldiers of Christ. How many kings did you have in this southern kingdom? 19. Well, we knew that one well. How many kings does the northern kingdom have? 19, same number of kings. Now, those kings rule longer than these kings do over here, because there's 100 years difference in the existence of that. How many good kings you have in the southern kingdom? You have 4. You have 4 good kings in the southern kingdom. How many good kings do you have in the northern kingdom? 0. Now see, that'll be so hard for some of you to understand. I mean, Charles, you're from Maine. You probably won't really grab a hold of this. But you see, it's real easy for me, being from Alabama, to know where the good folks are found, right? But there are only 4 of them, and there are only 4 good kings. Some of them are good and bad. And over here, some of them are bad and a little bit good. Is that a good way of saying it? Every now and then, there's a king over here that tries to turn the people back to God, but they're not able to do it. Okay. Wow. Is that too much to learn? Still getting it? Have you got it? Let's try one more time. Name of this kingdom? Judah. Name of this kingdom? Israel. Number of tribes? 2. Number of tribes? 10. Capital city? Jerusalem. Which kingdom is the good kingdom? Would you please say the south? All right. The good kingdom is Judah. Well, it's obvious which kingdom is the bad kingdom. Now, I don't know how important it is to know specific dates in the Old Testament, but Solomon dies about 931, 932, 933 years before Christ. And that's rather critical. Moses, the Old Testament, Moses is 1500 years BC. You got the years in the wilderness, got the period of the judges, you got the period of Saul, David, and Solomon. And that'll get you over to about 931 BC, when this kingdom is divided. Now here's a question. What happens to these kingdoms? And this is the part of the Bible we really don't know well. What happens to these kingdoms? Well, what does God do to evil kingdoms? God turns into where? You know that verse? God turns into every nation that forgets Him. You know that verse? Turns them into hell. Delivers them to hell, every nation that forgets Him. So you know this kingdom, it's headed out. When does this kingdom cease to exist? Well, if I say, shall I make it easier and say about 200 years before God says, I'm through with it. And so here's what happens to the northern kingdom in 722 BC. the Assyrians. Assyria. Capital city of Assyria is Nineveh. If I say Iraq, if I say Mosul, Mosul, which has been in the news recently, get on the internet and Google, and get on Google Maps and go over there and look down from heaven, down on the city of Mosul, and you'll be able to find the ruins of Nineveh. It's rather fascinating to look at. You're inside this city, and there's the place where this city is found. Here's what happens. This kingdom is so evil that the Assyrians come and scatter this nation all over the world. They're scattered. It's not that they're taken captive to Assyria. That's what's going to happen to you guys. You're not headed to Assyria, but all of you are going to go generally to the same place. But the philosophy of the kings of Assyria was, if you want to destroy a nation, you just move the people out, move other people in, and what you'll do, you'll destroy the unity of that nation. You think of the diversity that's come about in South Florida since Castro, and the Hispanic and the little Havana we have down in Miami, and the impact of it impacts all of South Florida, and so there's an identity crisis. Now, if you can imagine, here's Assyria, a great world power, and they're conquering all of these nations, and they're just plucking up people and moving these to here and moving those from there and moving them around. And so you don't have any unity anymore. But there were some who stayed in the promised land. But they intermarried. I'm talking about some of the northern kingdom intermarried with the Gentile nations that were brought in. And they were a half-caste nation. Part Gentile, part Jewish, intermarriage. When you get to the New Testament and you read about the Samaritans, that's who you guys are. Now, most of you are scattered down in Egypt and scattered up into Turkey and scattered all, into Persia and scattered all over the world, because whenever the king of Assyria said, want to destroy this nation, that's exactly what he does. He takes you and scatters you everywhere. But when you get to the Samaritans, the Jews had no connection at all with the Samaritans. I want to mention the woman of Samaria this morning, and she was amazed whenever Jesus was even in Samaria and said, I'm amazed that you're here, and how is it you, being a Jew, would even talk to a Samaritan woman? Talking about racial prejudice. And we have seen the in our own day children of mixed marriages, and the difficulty that in some circumstances those children endure. I think the world has changed, and I don't think they face nearly the problem that they used to, but in biblical times, as far as the Jews were concerned, you don't like those Samaritans over there. First of all, they never were true to God, and finally God destroyed them, and that makes you really righteous, right? That's what the minor prophets are going to come to say. You know what those minor prophets are going to come and say to you? You think your sister is bad? You're far worse than your own sister, talking figuratively. God destroyed the northern kingdom, and you guys are worse. Well, what happens to this kingdom? In 605, 606 BC, the Babylonians come. And instead of scattering the Jews, they carry the Jews to Babylon, where they stay for 70 years. After 70 years in Babylon, this nation comes back And that's the nation that was there whenever Jesus came. Now, why is that important? Well, let me show you why it is important. Look in the book of Jeremiah. Look in the book of Isaiah. Opening words of Isaiah. Verse 1 says what? That's on page 604. The vision Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning whom? Judah and Jerusalem. Who's Isaiah prophesying to? Prophesying to the southern kingdom. In the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, king of Judah. There is a time stamp at the beginning of almost all of the 17 books of prophecy. Look in the book of Jeremiah. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah. You see that? Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1. Of the priests who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin. That's one of your tribes, isn't it? Judah and Benjamin. To whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. Time stamp. And that's why this class, this introductory class to the minor prophet, is so important. You've got to understand what's going on, and so here's a time stamp. And so he says, this prophecy came first in the 13th year of his reign. It also came in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. Josiah is mentioned in verse 2, and verse 3 says, and it also came during the son of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, until the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the carrying away of Jerusalem, captive in the 5th month. Where's Jeremiah live? Jeremiah doesn't have a thing to say, you guys. You have been off the face of the earth for 100 years. You've been scattered all over, and you have lost your identity. And so now we've got this introduction. Let's skip Lamentation. Let's look at the book of Ezekiel. I guess just have to ring the bell whenever the time is up. Okay, Dan, I've got one more minute. It came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, that I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were open. And on the 5th day of the month, which is the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came to me. All we got to do is find when Jehoiachin fits in this. And now you'll find out that Ezekiel very likely knew Jeremiah. They're living at the same time. Look at the minor prophets, and then we'll stop. Look at Hosea, chapter 1, verse 1. Hosea, page 795. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. And so now, he is a prophet, and he gives the king of the north and the king of the south. And when you textually get into this, you'll find that Hosea's got nothing to say to you guys. Hosea is a prophet talking to folks over here in the northern kingdom. And so to understand the minor prophets, you need to look at chapter 1, verse 1 of every one of them and find chronologically when that person lived. And then you'll be able better to understand the topic being discussed. Well, that's a start. Next week we'll get into looking at individual books of the prophecy. Thank you very much.